Now let's look at a couple of models that have to do with community building. So we'll look at two models. We'll look at one that comes from branding and one that comes from community psychology. So the first one we'll look at is created by a guy called Patrick Hanlon, and he comes from a background of branding, of building brands. And he's very interested in how to build brands by building communities around the brands. So he wants to build brands that people can believe in. And his idea is that in order for people to be able to believe in a brand, then the brand has to have 7 elements. And the first one of these elements is that there has to be a creation story. Like how did this come about? Who got the idea? Where did you get the idea from? And so on. Then there also has to be a creed. What is it that this brand stands for? What do you believe? What do the creators of the brand believe in? And vicariously, what do you believe in if you're a fan of the brand or you're a consumer of the brand? Then there has to be icons. So icons are, for example, logos, but symbols that condense the meaning of the brand, and you can put on t-shirts or whatever. Then there have to be rituals, so something that if you're a member of the community, you will participate in certain rituals and you will know the rituals, like what is it we do through these rituals. Then there have to be pagans, so there have to be somebody who's not in the community. In order to have a strong sense of community, you have to be able to identify who's not in the community. And then there have to be sacred words. So certain words that you only know the meaning of if you're in the community, or at least that you only use if you're in the community. It's something that's really strong in building community is if you have secret words that you use, then you know you're in the community because you know what they mean. And lastly, there has to be some sort of leader. So Hanlon proposes that if you have these 7 components, then that is a good starting point for building a community around your brand. So let's look at an example. One example would be, let's take Apple. So what's the creation story of Apple, right? That's 2 guys named Steve who started building personal computers in their garage. And what's the creed? You can look at Apple's slogan, think differently. And also Apple often expressed this idea about putting design front and center in their products. And so something like design is not just to make it look and feel good, but design is the core of how things work. So really placing design thinking at the core of the product development and of their products. Then the icon, well, everybody knows it, right? It's the Apple logo, for example. That's one of the icons. There's also some pictures of Steve Jobs who have this iconic feel to them. You've seen them everywhere. Then there are the rituals. Some of the rituals is in relationship with product launches. That's usually a very ritualized performance. And sometimes you have these Apple Store campouts where if there's released a new iPhone or something like that, you'll have this long line of people sleeping in their sleeping bags. You can also see this as a ritual performed by the core members of the community around the brand. There's also a software conference, so that can also be seen as a ritual, a yearly software conference. Then who are the pagans? Of course, people who do not use MacBooks, right, and iPhones and so on. Probably in particular Android users or Microsoft users. They are not members of the community. What are the sacred words? Well, they have a lot of words that pertain to their products, like iPad, iPhone. Also, if you talk about Ventura or Mountain Lion or Big Sur or something like this, you will know that these are nicknames for different versions of the iOS operation system that is used on that Mac uses or Apple is using. And probably if you're not a Mac user, you wouldn't know what Big Sur was. So these are some of the some examples of sacred words. And then there's the leader, and that is Steve Jobs, so the visionary person leading the whole thing. So this is an example of how, this is classical primal branding, where these 7 elements are used to create a community around a brand, a community of users, a community of consumers. But you can use the same way of thinking to create communities inside your organization. So let's look at another example here. So this is, if you look at a company like Mars, so Mars is a family-owned company. And the creation story is this thing that more than 100 years ago, this Frank C. Mars started making candies and in a kitchen, and then it sort of took off from there. And over the years, there's been built almost like a mythology around Mars. So people who work at Mars, they will say in Forrest Gump, there is this scene where they're sitting on a park bench and somebody asks, you know, about the box of chocolate, and Forrest Gump talks about life is like a box of chocolate and stuff like that. And in Mars, they say this is really about Mars, right? It's the chocolate box that they have in the movie is the family's favorite chocolate box and stuff like that. So there's a whole mythology around that. And then there's the creed. The creed is more positive moments, more smiles. The icons are the M&Ms, for example. You see them in all their commercials, right? And they're animated, and they have like a whole catalog of personalities of M&Ms. Pagans are people who are not in Mars. Among Mars employees, there can be this, you know, we're the best company, and the people who are not good enough to be in Mars, they are not part of the community. Rituals, there is an initiation, 3 days with a trainer at a hotel. And then there's a surprise ritual, and I don't know, this is, I've been talking to some people working at Mars. I don't know if this is worldwide, but this was part of the community building in that place. So when you were new, then you would be taken on a tour of the place where you were gonna work. And at some point you will walk into a room, and a lot of people sit in a big open office space, working space. And when you walk in, then all of a sudden everybody will stand up and applaud you. And there's something very powerful about this ritual, because it's a really surprising welcome. And whenever a new person, even once you've worked there for years, every single time a new person come and you participate in this ritual, you also remember the good feeling it created in you when you were the new person. So it's a very powerful ritual. Then there are the sacred words, and there they have a lot of the, in most businesses, for example, the H&R department is just called the H&R department, right? But at Mars it's called the P&O, so personnel and organization. And I've seen this in many different organizations, that they rename the different departments, so they're not called the standard thing, but they're called something else. And in some organizations, including Mars, you almost have to have a dictionary at the beginning to learn what do all these abbreviations and words mean. But as you learn them, you start feeling more part of the community just because you know the language. And then, of course, the leaders, that's the Mars family. So these were 2 examples of how you can use these 7 elements to build communities, either among your consumers or among your employees. And you can also use these elements to increase the storytelling in your pitch. So now I'll invite you all to do an exercise where you can select a group of people. It can be your customers, it can be your employees, it can be your partners or stakeholders, it can be your own little team or somebody else. So pick a group of people that you would like to turn into a community. And then discuss how you can use the 7 elements of primal branding to build such a community. And also discuss how you can use the 7 elements of primal branding to enhance your the storytelling aspects of your pitch. And very importantly, I would like you to take out a phone or something like this, or a computer, and then record your conversation, because later we are going to analyze your conversation using the tools from the dialogue that we talked about earlier.